Welcome to the Scott Fraser Show, where I have pointless conversations with interesting people. I'm your host, Scott Fraser. Today I'm joined by writer JJ Dupuis, author of Roanoke Ridge, book one in the Creature X mystery series. Full disclosure, I am JJ's publisher, but this show is not just about promoting my authors. I'm happy to talk shit with anyone who wants to waste half an hour with me. JJ, thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here.
So you've written a book
in the comfort of my own home.
How are you doing with the social distancing? This is, I think that we have a real good chance to entertain about 5 people for half an hour with this content.
Well, actually, at this point, I think people are going to be so desperate for new content that a lot of people might jump on.
Because they're going to be dumpster diving.
We've all watched enough Tiger King now. We need another, another train wreck to witness.
Yeah, we need more low to middle brow content is definitely required. So your book Roanoke Ridge is a murder mystery, and tell us a little bit about the backdrop to that murder mystery.
So it is not a conventional whodunit in the sense of it explores the world of cryptozoology, which was very important to me to kind of blend two types of mystery, because when you get down to it, there really are, I feel, only two types of mystery. There's a murder mystery, which is the kind that is about solving something chaotic in our society, which comes from almost a sense of self-preservation, maintaining societal order by, finding who is disrupting our society. And then there are mysteries like those that cryptozoology present, where you have to be entirely comfortable and to a degree privileged to have the time to wonder about what is living in a far off forest, what might be prowling, the bottoms of Loch Ness or Lake Champlain. So I wanted to mix those two. One a kind of internal mystery and one a much more external kind of mystery. And
interesting.
So,
yeah, please continue.
Oh,
I'm not a professional broadcaster.
And I'm not very good at any form of public speaking, but I'm good at rambling.
Well, here, what's your relationship with cryptozoology?
Well, I've been fascinated with cryptozoology since I was a kid. And there was a series of books by, I think, a British publisher called Usborne. And there's one about monsters, one about ghosts, one about UFOs. And I would always go to my school library and take them out every chance I got. But you can imagine they were a hot commodity with all the other, 10-year-olds who want to read about the Loch Ness monster. And I think from that, because I've always been interested in zoology, paleontology, cryptozoology really blends with those two things, because a creature like a Loch Ness monster might be some kind of plesiosaur that somehow escaped the extinction at the end of the Cretaceous period. An ape man might just be another undiscovered subspecies of orangutan, for instance. So it's just credible enough that you really glom onto it and think like, hey, I might be the guy to go out and discover that. Whereas I don't think, even as a 10-year-old, I didn't think like, oh, I was going to somehow get a faster than light spacecraft and go to another planet and discover intelligent life there. But I thought that there was always a chance that at the bottom of the lake, I might see something that nobody else has seen.
Right. So do you think that's an interesting entry point into cryptozoology. I know a lot of young people get kind of enraptured by stuff like this. Like I've been fascinated with these with these stories and these efforts for a long time. What do you think? What do you think is driving cryptozoologists? Like, what these people, mainly men, who travel the world in search of Nessie or orang pendek or any other cryptid. What's driving these professional cryptozoologists?
Yeah, you're going to have, I think, a few different schools. Now, young Earth creationists are the main one that I hope to explore in the book series a little further down the road, because you have this group of people with this philosophy that if they can prove that there's still a dinosaur living in, the rainforest, if they can prove that, then that means that the theory of evolution is incorrect, and that the Earth might only be, as I believe it was Bishop Ussher who calculated that it was between 4,000 and 6,000 years old. And if they can prove that, then they can prove all of Christianity, essentially.
And what do you think about that as an argument for or against evolution? I mean, like, you could find a pterosaur in New Guinea. What would that tell us, if anything, about the theory of evolution?
I really don't see how that would disrupt the theory of evolution. Now, if you found, for example, a werewolf, that might completely change everything we think about. That if there's a man that could transform into a giant wolf, and we tend to see fewer of those legends after Darwin than we did before Darwin. But if you were to find a velociraptor, living in the Don Valley here in Toronto, I don't think anybody would think, oh, evolution must be wrong. They would just think that somehow a species had managed to survive when all the other dinosaurs, like non-avian dinosaurs, I should say, died out.
Yeah, so it's like in the case of the young Earth creationists, it's like their whole effort is based on a faulty understanding of the theory of evolution.
Yeah, and that faulty understanding, I think, comes from anytime science is viewed through a lens of already trying to prove a conclusion you've drawn through, in this case, religion. It's always going to reach a faulty conclusion. You can't try to force science and force facts to fit an ideology as, I mean, anti-scientific as most organized religion.
Who are the other types of people out there doing cryptozoology? It's not all. It's certainly not all young Earth creationists. There are people who almost they'll wear lab coats, and they either in some cases even have credentials. Who are some of these other people?
Well, I'll separate for the non-credentialed people, the kind of weekend warriors of cryptozoology. I think it's a hobby almost akin to bird watching, except, like I said before, when I was a kid, they feel they might make a major discovery, and I think these people were raised, probably an older generation than you and I, raised when there was still this idea that in South America they might discover a 100-foot long anaconda, or were raised before all these great dinosaur discoveries in the Gobi Desert. So there's this idea that remote lands might always offer some fantastic scientific discovery that will make them legendary. And I think that's part of the appeal. To be the person out in the woods who actually finds Bigfoot would be, you would be famous forever. And if not, if you fail completely, then you just had a great time in the woods for a weekend
Right,
with your
right.
friends.
Not
So
sounds like a
it's,
win-win.
yeah, precisely.
And then the third strain would be sort of scientist, like, biologist. I think of someone like Dr. Jeff Meldrum. Um, I don't know what his degree's in, but he pops up on all the monster shows as the science guy, right?
Yeah, he is sort of the heir apparent to the anthropologist Grover Krantz, who, when
Right.
Bigfoot was first making a splash in the 70s, he was the go-to anthropologist, and now it is, Dr. Meldrum. I think you'll always have people on the fringe of like legitimate scientists who want to also be that person to make that great discovery and are not willing to rule out like a creature like Bigfoot that most scientists have ruled out because, frankly, the evidence just isn't very good. When the vast majority of it is eyewitness testimony, but it's testimony from people who don't have experience with great apes. I mean, if you have no baseline to be an expert in Bigfoot, because there's no Bigfoot to have studied, then all eyewitness testimony really is meaningless.
Yeah, well, I remember I used to watch this like internet skepticism show, and they talked about a book called, it was something like the family systems of Sasquatch, and of course like the skeptical host was saying, well, first you have to establish Sasquatch before you can start postulating on what their family structures might be like. Is it so? There's this element of like the cart going before the horse with some of these folks. It's like they start with the assumption. Is that, am I
Well,
being judgmental or?
no, I think that's accurate. When there's little to work with and most of it is just imagination, then that the end result is going to be this kind of all these fanciful conclusions based on absolutely nothing. Um, so we have some certain people in the Bigfoot camp who think that Bigfoot is like a spiritual or extraterrestrial being. Other people think he's just an ape. Gigantopithecus is who's a relative of orangutan, a fossil ape known only from, or I should say primate known only from molars, I believe, discovered in China. So they're jumping to the conclusion that, oh, well, it's large molars would have fit into a large jaw, would therefore have to be a large primate.
Right.
And okay, he lived in China. Well, we know that people in Asia crossed the Bering Land Bridge to come to North America, and we think of them as indigenous people today.
So why not an 8 foot ape?
Well,
That's
exactly.
that's the yeah.
That's the thinking. So it's like any conclusion you can jump for. I mean, it's motivated reasoning, right? When you want this to be real, you're jumping for any possible conclusion. So that makes some sense.
Well, I certainly wasn't expecting this conversation to take a serious turn like this. I'd like to take a little break, and when we come back, we'll lighten the mood and talk some more shit about Bigfoot and stuff like that.
Sounds good.
We're back. Thanks for continuing to watch, all three of you. I'm Scott Fraser, host of the Scott Fraser Show. I'm here with author J.J. Dupuis. He wrote a book called Roanoke Ridge, which is book one in the Creature X mystery series. JJ, we've been talking about cryptozoology. I'm fascinated by the popular media around these creatures and the folks who search for them. What are your favorite cryptozoological TV shows?
All-time favorite will have to be In Search Of, the original with Leonard Nimoy.
Nice.
Although the new version is good. That is what really, I think, solidified my interest in Bigfoot, especially, as well as the Loch Ness Monster. Monster Quest was also a very good one. I do like some of the ones that are on the air right now, but I have to say the classics are my favorite.
Yeah. I mean, I remember watching In Search Of as a kid, and I kind of, like my interest in this subject kind of, faded for a while until I stumbled across Monster Quest, and I fell in love with the recurring characters. Like, what's your favorite episode of Monster Quest, or maybe who's your favorite figure who made an appearance on Monster Quest?
Favorite figure? See, I don't know that I have.
I mean, some of the greats like Esteban Sarmiento, Jeff Meldrum. There are so many great. Adam Davies. He's one of my favorites.
See, yeah, I mean, Jeff Meldrum, I've always quite liked because, as we talked about before, given his actual scientific credentials, just his presence there gives you hope. You think, Okay, maybe they will find something, and I hope for the sake of his credibility that they do find something.
He also tells people that they messed up too, right?
Yes, and that's the thing. He is not just a believer. He's not this kind of mindless. Oh yeah, it's got to be out there, and I'll take anything. He still teaches people science, or to a certain degree. So I think it's good that you have figures like him in the Bigfoot vein.
There was a fellow who Dr. Naish, who endorsed your first book one in the series. He made an appearance on at least two episodes of Monster Quest, as far as I can tell. I think he was in the Loch Ness Monster episode, and he reappeared in an episode called The Black Beast of Exmoor. How did you connect with this guy? Because like he's a real solid biologist and skeptic, and
Yeah, he hosts the Tetrapod Zoology podcast. He writes a Tetrapod Zoology blog for Scientific American. He's written a few books, Hunting Monsters, which is, I mean, if you're going to look for a scientific volume on cryptozoology, that's a good one to check out. It's just a matter of reaching out to him on social media. A lot of people in this field of science on the outside looking into cryptozoology, they want to talk about it. And when they find out what I'm doing, which is writing books that try to bring as much scientific skepticism into the world of cryptozoology, they're on board, because this is what something like Dr. Naish does with his podcast.
yeah, I mean, I love the scientist as the public educator too. So I just remember feeling kind of surprised when I first saw him on the show. But I guess that's kind of part of it's embedded in his work, that kind of public education, which is cool. Um, what if can you count down your top three favorite cryptids? Coming in at number
See,
three.
that changes very frequently, but we'll say coming in at number three, Orang Pendek.
Nice. And what is orang pendek for those who don't know?
Well, there's two kind of schools of thought. Some think that he is an upright walking, hairy wild man um, in the jungles of Sumatra, and others believe that he's just a undiscovered species of orangutan, um, given the orange hair.
Oh, okay, yeah, that would be just could also be a case of convergent evolution, but no matter. And is there not another theory that it could be Homo, what was the little species of Hobbit man, Homo
Homo floriensis. Yeah.
floriensis, right?
People have suggested that, and again, I sort of see that as that kind of reaching for anything
Yeah,
that kind of fits, which is what we do with this kind of pseudoscience, right?
it would
And
be
that's the
so
fun
cool if
of it.
there was a little species of human.
Well, when you
I
look at
would love
other,
that.
yeah, when you look at other hominids that coexisted with us at some point in time, you can't help but feel ripped off that
Yeah, that would
Homo
have been so
sapiens
cool.
sapiens are the only ones around right now in our
It's
time.
lonely. It's lonely in
Yeah,
here.
exactly.
Okay, so number two, who's coming in at number two?
This it will be biased because of the second book in the series, but Cressy, which is a giant eel that supposedly lives in Lake Crescent in Newfoundland, near a town called Roberts Arm, Newfoundland, is probably my number two favorite right now.
And that's because presumably where are you with the writing of that book? Where are you in the process? Are you finished?
I'm finished, so I just did the first round of edits slash rewrites, and I'm sure there'll be more before it hits the shelves. But so I'm very deep into it,
Right.
and I'm just fascinated by the idea of a giant eel, because I try to look at monsters that or cryptids that are plausible to some degree before I look at those that are implausible. So I have a hard time believing that you might have a plesiosaur living in Loch Ness in Scotland, but the idea that an eel that swam up the wrong river, Tommy's Arm River in this case, got lost while going to the Sargasso Sea to mate, gets lost and stuck in some lake that goes to the ocean. It's not trapped, it's not landlocked. Um, and just develops into a larger and larger animal because it's not using its resources to go spawn. Like that, that to me is, it's almost credible, and that's what makes
Yeah,
it fun.
you could, depending on who is telling, like if there were, if a body washed up or someone like a fisherman caught one, it wouldn't blow our mind. It would just be like, oh wow, that's cool.
Exactly. It would still change our kind of understanding of like the local ecosystem in the lake, but it wouldn't. It's not as though a dinosaur or a marine reptile from the Mesozoic era was found alive.
What did you think of the episode of Monster Quest that covered Cressy? Jeff, we lost our connection there. Can you go? We were talking about what you liked about the episode on Lake Crescent. Can you go over that again?
Oh, okay, all right. Well, I quite liked the episode overall, but they did one technique that I don't like in these kind of documentaries, where they started looking at a case that was not in Lake Crescent itself, but in Lake Ontario, about a fisherman who just happened to encounter what he thought was a log that all of a sudden sprang to life and disappeared in the water. And one thing that we often see with cryptozoologists is they try to liken many disparate stories and try to weave together um, a bunch of eyewitness testimony that don't really like relate to one another.
Right.
And so that was sort of a distraction. But the thing I like the most about it is when they had marine biologists trying to look at how they would lure a creature like that to study it if it did indeed live in that lake.
Right. So who's coming in at number one?
Has to be Sasquatch. Has to be Bigfoot.
Nice, nice. Now
Oh,
what? There are so many sightings of Sasquatch all across North America. Do you have like a, where do you think where are some of the hot spots for Bigfoot, for Sasquatch?
I'm sort of a Sasquatch purist, and so this will probably make other people in the cryptozoological community upset. I'm not one who believes that you have Sasquatch in upstate New York or in Minnesota or in Florida. I I think it would have to be in the Pacific Northwest, if anything. My feeling is, and this is me trying to rationalize pseudoscience. My feeling is, if these creatures were to exist, they would, I mean, if they're similar size to, say, something like a grizzly bear, that they would need that similar kind of habitat, access to that amount of food, that fish, for instance, um, that you would not have something so large, living, just outside of the city limits in,
Yeah,
Detroit.
yeah,
I don't buy
yeah.
into that.
What about Northern Ontario? There was some great Monster Quest episode. It was there were some phenomenal YouTube rip-offs where it was like scientists attacked by Bigfoot. So what about those episodes?
I do follow, like, I mean, I always follow something when I see, especially given my interest, my news feeds and my social media often give me these cryptozoological stories. So I'm always curious about what somebody saw, apparently, in Algonquin Park or even further north. But just, I find it less credible even than your average cryptozoological story, because there's even less evidence. The evidence for Bigfoot, even out of the Pacific Northwest, isn't very strong. But it gives me something to kind of try to wrap my mind around, whether it's hair samples from supposedly unknown primates, whether it's footprints, even though we know the majority of those have been hoaxed, whether it's the Patterson-Gimlin film or other Bigfoot photographs and films. But I mean, we all think of the Patterson-Gimlin film, I think, when we're talking about Bigfoot.
It's
At least
iconic.
that's, yes. I think it's the second most watched clip next to the Zapruder film clip from the Kennedy assassination.
Wow, wow.
So
um, well, this has been great. Where are you going to take the series next? You're going to Lake Cressy, and then where?
then we're gonna
Sorry, Lake
go to,
Crescent.
yeah, with Cressy and Lake Crescent. Then we're gonna go to Papua New Guinea, because I want to talk about the ropin, which is a bioluminescent pterosaur that soars above the canopies of the forests there,
No doubt it
supposedly.
does. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to learning more. Thanks for killing half an hour with me. And I just want to correct one thing real quick. You mentioned Bigfoot in Florida. That would probably be a skunk ape.
Yes, there are all sorts of names for depending on what part of the U.S. you go to.
Well, this has been great. Thanks for being a good sport. Scott Fraser, host of the Scott Fraser Show, joined here today for episode 1 by author JJ Dupuis. Thanks for being here. Cool. Thanks, Jeff.
Oh, that was my pleasure, man. I'm sorry I've had a better interview.
You were great. I think that there's going to be probably about 4 or 5 people who will watch this. And
okay, so hold on. My mom, she's
why would your mom watch this nonsense?
Yeah, actually, my mom.